Good morning, everybody. How we doing today? It's Sunday. I'm here on planet Earth, checking in from all zones. Appreciate you Europeans, Asian folks, Singapore, Japan. We got people all over now. It's great stuff. Australia. Here we go. 12 prestige artists from the early years that are very unfamiliar to people. We did an episode on Blue Note the other day, 12 of the least shown, known Blue Notes. And it's actually a little easier to do at Prestige, although Prestige is still fairly well known cover to cover, like Blue Note. After Prestige and Blue Note, in terms of jazz labels where the volume of the body of work is known to the majority of jazz fans, or like, it's just none of the other labels come close to having their complete body of work be so omnipresent. You know, and even the Blue Note rare stuff, you still see it posted some. If you have the Blue Note logo on something, it's going to be reissuable forever. So, that being said, once you get to labels like Argo, there's going to be a lot of stuff that I could probably pull the first 25 records and most of you would recognize 2 or 3 names. But we'll get to Argo at some point, I think, just to kind of illustrate this. But I already did a series on the white artists, how many weird, rare white artists made great records in jazz but are completely forgotten. And the number of forgotten black artists is probably just as high, but they're forgotten for different reasons. Let's just jump right in. The first guy that I want to talk about today is a guy by the name of Moondog. And Moondog is an interesting person. He actually was from Kansas originally, believe it or not. He goes to New York in 1942, I believe, and he stays in New York until the late 70s, mid-70s. And he's known to be on 6th Avenue between 52nd and 55th Street. And he had a long beard. He grew his hair really long. He started wearing Viking helmets and cloaks. He was a street personality. He made music with weird instruments. He invented weird instruments. He would sometimes be busking, playing music for money. Other times he'd be selling trinkets and stuff he found in dumpsters and instruments he made. He used all kinds of strange things to source sounds and, in a sense, sampled life and made music with it in a way that modern guys in the studio will sample things and weird source sounds. He's kind of a precursor to a lot of that, looping things and making weird, interesting patterns with weird rhythm instruments. Just a strange fella. He does a couple things at Epic as well, Columbia. He does 3 records for Prestige in the 7000 series. 7042, more Moondog is 7069, and then the story of Moondog is 7099. It's the last album in the 7000 series before it rolls over to 7100. So these 3 records have all been kind of reissued. These are all reissues, obviously. My wife bought them for me for Christmas 2 years ago. And I don't listen to them a ton. They're jazz in a very loose sense, but they're not jazz in a conventional sense, that's for sure. He's an interesting guy, though. And Prestige, like I said, Weinstock, not a guy that wanted to lose money. Thought it was interesting enough and compelling enough and probably sold well enough to justify him putting out 3 LPs of the guy's stuff. So, it's part of the legend of Prestige, and we need to talk about it. Number 2 on this list, and Moondog's not super rare. You see Moondog stuff posted, people collect it because it is available in print right now. The Foreman with Beers label has issued a lot of it, a reissue label. That being said, moving on to the next artist is Ray Draper. And Ray Draper was born in 1940, I believe. Yeah, in New York City. And that makes him a very young cat in the 50s. And so when he records this first record here at Prestige, 7096, tough record to come by the way, with Jackie McLean, Mal Waldron, and Webster Young, who we're going to talk about again in a second on trumpet. It's a great record. It's a very interesting record, and he's 16 years old when he records it. And then to up the ante, he goes in the studio the next year in Prestige and adds John Coltrane to his group. And we're talking 1957, so Coltrane's still very much a young, undiscovered talent. Coltrane hasn't made his first record as a leader yet. He has been working, of course, with Miles since 54, 55. So he's not by any means a nobody, but quite a big coup for a young 16, 17-year-old tuba player, which is not an instrument you hear a lot in jazz to begin with, to have Coltrane come in. And he makes a third record at Jubilee that Coltrane also appears on. So Coltrane obviously heard something in young Ray Draper that he was pretty compelled by. Sadly, he goes to jail in late 57 or 58, and he stays there for a decade to the late 60s for heroin, for using heroin. So was he even 18 when he got that 10-year sentence for doing drugs? Oh my God, what kind of a nation imprisons someone for that long? And I don't know all the details of the story, but there's no issue or question about drugs having been used to suppress civil rights. And everything that we fought for on the left in terms of social movement and gain, there's a counter movement that tries to find ways to undo that progress. And the war on drugs escalates as civil rights comes into play. And we don't have the right to march into your home and do as we wish to. We found a new way to get around that. And we don't have the right to enslave you or incarcerate you for no reason. We found a way to get around that. The injustice is so omnipresent, and again, it's designed to keep the outrage. They want liberal, white, and minority Americans outraged all the time at the injustice, so that they don't dialogue with the people on the right who think the right thing is being done because of their ignorance and their fear of people who are different from them because they've been taught so their whole life. And as long as that rift remains, the political quagmire that we're in will also remain. So Draper's an interesting guy, and that's not the end of his story. He gets out in 66, maybe 67, and this is not on Prestige, but he records a record, Red Beans and Rice. And in 67, he puts together this fusion jazz rock crew that predates Bitches Brewing in a silent way. And for a lot of people, this is one of the first fusion jazz rock funk record. And it's actually pretty good. The band, of course, when that record came out, was not thrilled by the fact that Red Beans and Rice ended up having just him on the cover. And so the band quit shortly after that, and he finds himself back alone as a musician, which he gets back into heroin, sadly. But he's trying to keep himself clean, trying to find work. He's composing and writing again. Then in 82 in Harlem, he gets robbed, hands over his money, and they still shoot and kill him. Some young hoodlums. Sad, sad story. But jazz is a chorus of sad, sad stories, unfortunately. And what can you do about it? So the aforementioned Webster Young is a fiery trumpet player that we don't hear a lot of. Yet he played with a lot of greats. Webster was born in 1932. He plays with Coltrane, he plays with Dexter Gordon, he plays with Hampton Hawes, he plays with Jackie McLean, he plays with Ike and Tina Turner in the 60s, interestingly enough. He is from the DC area. Miles Davis convinces him to move to New York in the late 50s. Whether he works with Webster Young or not, I don't think he does. But he gets some recordings at Prestige with Idris Suleiman, and he makes, of course, this record at Prestige 7106. We just saw him on that Ray Draper album. So he is playing with a lot of the greats at this time. For Lady is, of course, a reference to Billie Holiday. And the songs on this record are all kind of a tribute to her. And cleverly enough, Webster Young says, you know what, if I'm going to do Billie Holiday, I can't get Lester Young. but I can get vice pres. So he recruits Paul Kinnichet to play the alto, and he just dreams and drifts across this like his protege Lester. And Lester and Billy, of course, were two of the great simpatico jazz artists of all time. They just really were in lockstep with each other, and you can feel their hearts kind of ebb and flow together like few other people in the music. Next guy I want to talk to you about, number 9, we're counting down here, is the great Bill Jennings. And Bill Jennings is one of those great guitar players that somehow jazz people have kind of overlooked. And we're going to talk about another one here in a minute, Tiny Grimes. But this guy's pedigree, Bill Jennings, is really insane. He's born in 1919, which makes him a pretty old cat already. He's considered the architect of soul jazz by a lot of people. He was a huge influence on B.B. King as a young kid. B.B. King was listening to Bill Jennings. He plays with Willis Gator Jackson, brother Jack McDuff. He plays with Leo Parker, who we just talked about on the Rare Unknown Blue Note artist. He plays with organ player Bill Doggett. He plays with Louis Jordan. And some of that early jump shout stuff that they were doing is super influential and helps create R&B music. He can play swing, he can play bebop, he can play the jump blues, R&B, pop. And interestingly enough, he was left-handed. So he played guitar upside down his whole career. And that just tells you something about these guys, man. The whole essence of the blues is we're going to make do. There's another record he does here, 71, 77. And these are tough records to come by. And they're probably both approaching 80 to 100 bucks now if you're trying to find decent old copies of them. Maybe even more. Tough records to find though. And the thing about a lot of these obscure artists, a lot of their stuff is very limited in availability, and the demand is not that high, but they didn't sell well, and so thus they've not been reissued a lot. And so you find albums that have not been reissued a lot, and generally that lack of there being alternative copies will drive the cost up on something that isn't super in demand or that many people even know. But again, there's only the original pressing of it, or maybe one Japanese version somewhere. And so the fewer pressings you got of a less popular record can make those records really expensive, even compared to some of the ones you really are that are super collectible. Anyway, we're going to talk about Teo Macero now. Teo. And Teo works with Miles Davis as a producer. He's on Time Out by Brubeck. But before his time as a producer at Columbia Studios for 20 years, he is a trumpet player, if I recall, or is it saxophone? I gotta look again. He's a sax player. Born in 1925, and his career as a player isn't that long-lived. He ends up being a big influence on the Bitches Brew sessions and innovates some stuff that became quite popular in jazz later. But as a player, he makes this record for Prestige in probably 1958. Pretty tough to come by. This is a Japanese pressing. And interestingly enough, in 54 and 55, he's working with Charlie Mingus. This is on Bethlehem label, and it's got a couple different covers, but this is the Jazz Experiments of Charles Mingus. I think there's a 10-inch version of this as well. And Teo is a part of this process, this kind of jazz laboratory where they were fusing the third stream and chamber music and real compositional, moody melodica meets jazz playing. And then there's this one on Savoy, the Composer's Workshop with Mingus, Willie Cirillo, Teo Macero, and John LaPorta. So one brother and sounds like 3 Italian guys. And these are both pretty tough records to come by in the Mingus catalog. And really, Jazz Composer's Workshop isn't really billed as a Mingus record per se, but it's Teo Macero at a very young age. And from a very young age, he's got the third stream compositional itch in him. And so he's an important part of things like Sketches of Spain, Miles Ahead, Porgy and Bess. He wants to bring the European tradition into jazz, and it doesn't always blend in the best way. And Teo Macero and Miles had a falling out after the Quiet Nights Gil Evans record that he finished kind of without Miles. Miles and Gil Evans weren't happy with how it came out. I actually like Quiet Nights, but him and Teo end up mending their fences. And I think that's part of when you are at Columbia Records, this guy's going to be here. So you might as well just figure out how to get along with him. And again, they end up being integral parts of Bitches Brew and a lot of those developments in sound and recording that happened during the Bitches Brew session. Brian Eno, the great producer, actually cites Teo Macero as one of his big influences. So jazz does breed itself into all the other aspects of the music world, as it were. The next guy we're going to talk about is the fabulous Tiny Grimes, another great and rather unheralded guitar player. This is Tiny Grimes with Coleman Hawkins. There's the dissonance of Teo Macero there on the sax. There's Coleman Hawkins, unmistakable Coleman. You can't go wrong with Coleman Hawkins. You know what I mean? Just know that. Anything Coleman Hawkins did in the 50s, even on RCA and Capitol, Coleman Hawkins got so much soul leaking out of him that that's just always going to be heavy, black. And you might try to put me as packages and make me look as light skinned as possible. Don't worry, Columbia. Don't worry, Decca. Don't worry, Capitol, RCA. I'ma still be a brother. Coleman Hawkins is a heavy, heavy cat. Born Lloyd Grimes. He played with Art Tatum back in 43 and 44, 45, up into the recording band. He's a part of that rhythm section. He also plays with Charlie Parker, records with him briefly, does some recording with Billie Holiday. He is in quite demand for some studio work. As I said, he did the work with Coleman Hawkins, Illinois Jack Cat. He plays guitar rhythm on some of his stuff. Got Spiderweb. He plays some with Art Pepper. He plays some with Roy Eldridge. So Tiny plays with some really heavy royalty in the jazz world, and he does a second record called Callin' the Blues shortly after at Prestige 7144, and then he does a couple things on the Swingville label as well that are also just fantastic and worth looking for. Tiny Grimes deserves more adulation than he gets at the present time, that's for sure. Now moving on, number 6, least most popular Prestige recording artist from 55 to 65, and Betty Roche. Betty's a heavy gal, and she's heavy enough that at one point she decides to walk away from the music business and does so. And my guess from my heart would be to raise children. You know, that would seem to be the most likely thing. Again, I'm assuming on some level here. But she makes 2 records for Prestige, 7187 and 7198. So probably both 62, 63 in that era. They're fantastic. They're gorgeous. She's a bluesy, earthy, just mother of the world type singer that could put you on your knee and make that scratch on your leg feel better and sneak a chocolate candy coin into your pocket for you to find later because she loves you so much. She's just marvelous. She's known originally for in the 40s playing with Duke Ellington, and during the recording band she sings live at the Carnegie Hall stuff, on some of the sacred stuff. She's a big part of Ellington's band. She ends up leaving Ellington's group, and she sings with the she wins the singing contest sings with the Savoy Sultans for a while. She sings with Lester Young, Hot Lips Page. In the 40s, she's at Minton's Playhouse playing bebop with Thelonious Monk and Kenny Clark. In 44, she joins Earl Hines and plays with him, sings with him for a while. Then in 51, she goes back to Duke's group, and they end up recording the Ellington Uptown record, where they record Take the A Train, because they couldn't record it back in the 40s during the war years. So that version of on Ellington Uptown of Take the A Train with her singing all those great vocals has become the version of that song, and it gets reissued and recompiled on every Ellington compilation that comes out. It's that version with Betty Roche. She also makes a great record of Bethlehem in 54. That's also really hard to find. I'm a big fan of Betty Roche. I played her a lot at my jazz brunch gigs. It's just moody, bluesy, honest. Again, just straight gospel. Bill Jennings is on this, who we just talked about. Jimmy Forrest, Jack McDuff, Wendell Marshall, and Roy Haynes. I love both of her records on Prestige, and her one, of course, on Bethlehem. A really fantastic gal. Another guy who's not too well known, number 5 now, counting down, is Earl Coleman. He's a singer born in 1925, and Prestige doesn't have a lot of singers. You know, Betty Roche is one of the singers that you don't think about, but here's Earl Coleman. And Earl Coleman, there's Midtown Manhattan. You can hear right away some Al Hibbler in that. You can hear some Billy Eckstine in that. And I believe he actually played with Billy Eckstine. I gotta look here again. Because he's born by 1925. He plays with Jay McShann in the 40s, Earl Hines, and Billy Eckstine. So yeah, I was right. And a guy by the name of King Colax. I've heard that name, but I can't tell you who King Colax is, to be honest. She records with Parker Roach and Fats Navarro in 48. Earl Coleman does, sorry. And then he also plays with Gene Ammons. He sings with Sonny Rollins in the 50s, Farmer and Grice. In 1960s, he's working with Gerald Wilson at Pacific Records on the West Coast. And I love some of those recordings. And then in 1962, he's singing with Don Byas, recording in Paris. So he also must go over to Paris and live there for a while. He's a guy you don't think about very much or hear very much about. And he's a fine, rich baritone singer. And it's one of those rare Prestige records, 70-45, that you just don't hear much about. On this record is Hank Jones, Shadow Wilson, Wendell Marshall, Oscar Pettiford, and R. Farmer, and Gigi Grice. So that's where he must play with Grice and Farmer, is on this recording. And Grice and Farmer are both recording for Prestige in this moment, 55 or so. That's a great record. Not one I've actually honestly listened to too much. Number 4 on my list is a strange record by a guy by the name of King Pleasure, and Annie Ross, actually, of Lambert Hendrickson Ross, is on some of this as well. But King Pleasure is an interesting vocalese, which is something Bob Dorough does. John Hendricks does some vocalese, and you're basically singing like a horn player. And sometimes it's going to be words, but other times in vocalese, you might just go into a form of scat almost, and do some and just play some horn with your mouth. And this King Pleasure record is pretty tough to come by. This is a second pressing, I believe. Upside down. No, it's not. That's written upside down. Weird. It's 7128. So probably 1963 or 4. Probably 63. He imitates the solos of Charlie Parker, Lester Young, and a bunch of other players on this record. And it's just interesting, unique. He was born Clarice Brooks, 1922. Astral Weeks by Van Morrison is said to be very much influenced by King Pleasure. He only makes the one record for Prestige that I'm aware of. I think he does some stuff for King Records before this on the 10-inch era. I don't find King Records very often here. Interesting stuff. Like I said, it's not something you can really compare much to. It's pretty unique, pretty different. That sounds like Annie Ross right there. Number 3 on my list is a gal by the name of Barbara Lee. And this is Barbara Lee 7100 Prestige. This is a rare record. You don't see this one hardly ever. Dick Carey is doing the arranging here with Johnny Windhurst on the trumpet, Ernie Caceres on the clarinet, Garvin Bushell on the oboe, Ozzie Johnson's on the drums, I know that name, Jimmy Rainey is on the guitar. There's a lot of names I don't know. I'm guessing probably a lot of them are white cats. She's a white singer, of course. This one is 7065, and these are two of the toughest Prestige records to find. They're tough to come by. She's born in 1929 in Detroit. She's born to an affluent white family in the city of industry. She ends up going to Wellesley College in Boston, where she studies music theory and becomes very knowledgeable about the music and the American Songbook. She eventually sings at the Storyville Club, and then in the 60s she decides to go into acting and gets a degree in that and becomes a gifted and well-recognized actress on the West Coast. I like these records. She doesn't have a ton of blues in her. But again, she comes from an affluent white family, so only so much blues could really be expected. She ends up on the concert stage doing a series of songbook concerts because she's such a practitioner that her rendition and her entry into a piece, she seems to so capture and embody how songs were initially composed and arranged and written, that she does these concerts dedicated to certain songbook artists, and I guess they were really well acclaimed. So she's got a pretty broad career, but her two Prestige recordings are very interesting records, and they're tough to find, and it's something I was certainly happy to stumble on when I did. And again, examples of pretty rare Prestige titles. Number 2 on my list is a guy by the name of John Eardley. And Eardley's a nice little player. He's a trumpet player. He's born in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1928. And I think Altoona is coal mine country, if I recall. I'm not completely positive on that. He plays with Paul Whiteman, one of the great white orchestras, and some consider him to be the king of swing, Paul Whiteman, although Benny Goodman certainly would have issues with that, and then all the great black orchestras weren't even considered for that title, sadly enough. But when you look at Glenn Miller and Paul Whiteman and Benny Goodman, the amount of records those guys sold in the swing era is pretty astronomical, and we don't really recognize how big the music industry was in the 30s, even during the Depression. In New York City from 53 to 56, he makes these recordings. He shows up with Phil Woods, Jerry Mulligan, and a few other artists of that ilk. And then in 56, he decides to move to Belgium. And then he ends up in Germany, and he spends a long part of his life in Europe. And he plays with Chet Baker, I believe, in Germany in the 60s. So again, not a guy you hear much about, not a record cover you see very often. It's a pretty awful graphic layout. A lot of the band members here: Phil Woods, Dick Stabulus, Zoot Sims, Teddy Kotick. So again, the white jazz elite from that time in New York. John Eardley, not a guy you hear much about. And then last on my list, and I knew this was going to be number 1 from the second I decided to do this record, is Sanford Gold. And Sanford Gold is a brother. He's a piano player. He dates back, born in 1911 in Cleveland, so he's an old brother. In the 1930s, he's playing with a lot of cats. The war, he serves in the war from 42 to 46. And then before that, he was a member of CBS recording studios, doing a lot of recording for them. When he comes back from the war, he does some recording with Don Byas, Sally Blair, Johnny Smith, Al Cohn, and Coleman Hawkins. But this record is probably the rarest Prestige record I know of. It's 7019. This is an old pressing of this. It's not one I've ever come across in the store. It took me a number of years to even track one down online, and when I finally did find it, I think I only paid $20 for it because the demand was so not there. And I've shown this and talked about this in my Facebook groups numerous times, and I'm amazed by how many really big jazz fans have never heard of Sanford Gold or seen this record. It's a prominent number early in the Prestige discography, 7019. It's surrounded by Rollins and Monk and Miles Davis, and just all these legends are making records early in the Prestige discography, and this is smack in the middle, and no one knows nothing about it. Piano d'Or, the golden piano of Sanford Gold. And the solo piano stuff for the most part, maybe all of it even. A great cover of Manhattan. Anything with Manhattan on the cover to me creates an atmosphere and a vibe. And I think without question, this is the rarest of all the Prestige albums in the 7000 Series 71 going forward. Of all those names we talked about, I don't think I've ever seen anybody post this. I've seen people post on my Facebook group, John Eardley, Barbara Lee once or twice, the King Pleasure, Earl Coleman once or twice, the Betty Roach a couple times. I know that I personally have influenced people to buy some of these records by sharing these records in my Facebook groups, so other collectors go out and buy them. And I'm also seeing that with my YouTube channel now, where people are buying things I talk about on my channel, and then they're posting them in their Facebook group. Sometimes they're crediting me as influencing them, but it's very often I do an episode on somebody, and then next week I'll see 3 guys posting records I just bought that I talked about in my episode, and that's fantastic. That's what we're here to do, is to spread the music and shed the light on a broader range of artists than most people are cognizant of. But Teo Macero, Tiny Grimes, Bill Jennings, Webster Young and Ray Draper, he posted probably the most. Moondog, people get it for the curiosity of it. But like I said, the Sanford Gold record, I've never seen anybody post it. I don't know any other collector who has it. Even the guys who I know everything. Looking at you, Scott Baldwin, I don't think you said you've seen it, if I recall. It's a rare piece. It's a cool piece. And it's so rare that I'm sure some Discogs eBay sellers would try to get a couple $100 for it, because that's just who they are. But like I said, I think I found mine for $20 when I finally found it, and I was like, yeah. Ironically, my Holy Grail record, the one I'm most looking for, that I've never had a chance to even buy and lose at auction, is by a gal by the name of Pinky Winters. I've never had a chance to bid on it. Just yesterday, one shows up on eBay. They want $1,800 for it. $1,800. Come on. No one's gonna pay that for that. Someone wants to spring for $1,800 so I can get that record to complete my Argo 600 series. I'll give you my address. All love and joking aside, I'm guessing it's going to come down over the course of the next 6 months. But it's the first time I've even seen one up for sale. So it's definitely a rare piece. Y'all be safe. You have a great day. Enjoy the sun if you get some. If it's raining, put on some jazz and stay inside. Y'all be blessed. Much love. Ask me your questions. Tell me what episodes you want to see. I try to get to people's suggestions, especially if they're kind of in line with what I'm doing. And there's just some artists I don't have enough material to cover. And I'll probably have to get to some of those artists down the road. But for now, I got so many artists where I have 20, 30, 40 records by them. And those are the artists I'm trying to cover first and foremost, because I always have a love affair with those guys. Y'all be safe. Talk to you soon. Peace.